I'm so glad to finally have you here in person and pick your brain a little bit about this concept called Game B. Before we get into the details of it, do you want to just briefly go over, if you will, the origins of the term and sort of how it came to be, put into both your consciousness and the public consciousness for those of us who are aware of it more generally?
Sure. First, I would say I'm not the progenitor of it, though I was one of the group founders. It was clearly a group effort. So let's make sure we give credit to what we refer to as the old gangsters, about a dozen, 15 people that did the work to bring it into being. It was actually a pivot in the kind of venture capital sense. We originally started off in 2012 trying to create a political party called the Emancipation Party. And in fact, our old website is still up because it's got some very interesting things on it at emancipationparty.org. If you want to see what we're up to, go check it out. I will say we were completely incompetent, didn't know what we were doing, and we were not successful. Although, in truth, what we found, we did some, being a lot of ex-business people, I think we had 4 ex-CEOs amongst our 13-person startup team. We did some market research to find out why our recruiting was going so slow or slower than we'd like. And we found that it was popular amongst boomers. It was tolerably popular amongst Gen Xers, but it was completely unacceptable to millennials. And we said, political party completely unacceptable to millennials. There's a really bad idea. So we dug into that a little bit more, and we discovered that even the mere concept of a political party was anathema to millennials, at least in 2012. You might as well have been trying to sell cat shit with powdered sugar on it, right? And so we had a brainstorming session. And the way we did both the Emancipation Party and Game B was actually quite interesting. We flew in a group of people from all around the country and even later in from Canada to a little town in Virginia, Stanton, Virginia. And we would meet for 3 days and brainstorm face to face with social events in the middle, nice dinners, too much liquor some nights. And then we had our online world in base camp where we'd continue the discussions. And the combination of face to face and online was magic. For various reasons, I went back and reviewed some of the stuff that's in our online system, which I've archived and kept. It's amazingly good stuff. And I've long said that online by itself produces weak links and, frankly, weak stuff mostly. I mean, just read Twitter, just endless amounts of performative horseshit, basically. And face-to-face is great for building real relationships with people and building strong links. But it's expensive, flying people to, cross country to Virginia every 6 weeks got to be pretty expensive. And but the combination of the two was magical. And so I think that's a really interesting thing to keep in mind about how Game B came into existence. But anyway, when in terms of the actual emergence of the name and concept Game B, in this session in January 2013, we were saying, what do we do? A guy named Jordan Hall got to the whiteboard and he said, okay, here's a party, but it's too steep. Millennials can't deal with it. Let's think about a broader, much more powerful, in some sense, social movement concept that would be an on-ramp, maybe eventually, to a political party. And we started saying, all right, what is the fundamental diagnosis of our political party, which is that, the world is fucked and it needs to be unfucked, right, basically, in some very major ways. And so he started enumerating on the board, blah, blah, blah. And he said, okay, he just called the status quo Game A and the new idea of the new emerging society Game B. And he called it a new social operating system, et cetera. And we spent a couple hours on it. We went on to talk about other things. Then in the online world between that meeting and the next face-to-face meeting, which was in March, a fellow named Thor Muller had basically reviewed the was thinking through. He's a real good marketing guy. And he said, you know what? We ought to call this thing Game B, right? Originally, it just been generic names on the whiteboard, right? No significance, no naming, no branding, and et cetera. This new thing we're cooking up. And so everybody just said, shit, yeah, that's a great name. And so that's how the name came to be. Even the Game B logo was created by Thor at around that time, maybe a little thereafter. And while we've sparkled it up a little bit, not much, we still use the same logo today. So that's essentially the origin story of how Game B came to be.
Oh, great. And I wanted to then move right into the comparison then, which is implied by the name, which is that, the meme on Twitter would be that, a game B implies the existence of a game A. And so what are the differing characteristics of what we would call game A, which is, one would presume, the phase of civilization that we're in currently that game E is, let's say, in opposition to?
Yeah, I wouldn't say opposition to, and that's a very important note. Game A, and there are different ways to think about the origins of Game A. You can make an argument it goes back to the invention of architecture, of agriculture. But my view, and I think the most useful lens of the origins of Game A, is around 1700, where we had the combination of the beginnings of democracy with the Glorious Revolution in Great Britain, where the king was overthrown, new king was imported, and king and queen were imported in the Netherlands, but their powers were clearly that of a constitutional monarch with parliament in charge. At the same time, science had been invented, real true modern science. Newton had published his works in the 1660, 1670. There have been a lot of other good scientific work, Robert Boyle, etc. And so real science finally emerged right around that time. It almost emerged back in ancient Greece, but it didn't quite. And it had a second chance, and it happened to gel at that time. And third, modern finance was invented in 1694 with the invention of the Bank of England, which was one of those interesting accidents of history. The King of England needed some money. He'd gotten into trouble fighting too many wars, and actually floated the Bank of England to private investors in return for loans. So the ability to essentially make money by doing loans, classic fractional reserve banking under the supervision of a central bank, in this case a privately owned one, kind of like the Federal Reserve, was invented then. So those were the three antecedents that were necessary for Game A to get rolling. And at the same time, partially driven by science, but actually less so than you would think, technology had been slowly starting to accelerate in the 17th century and then exploded into the 18th century with all the famous things we learned about in fifth grade social studies, the spinning jenny and all the various textile-oriented stuff, the early steam engines, the Newcomen steam engine, which was so inefficient, it was really only useful at the mouths of coal mines for pumping water out of coal mines, because you could have essentially infinite free coal, so you didn't care how inefficient it was. Then James Watt famously massively improved it in the late 18th century. And you combine the growing set of automations around textiles in particular, but also other things, and combine that with steam engines, that really came into the fore around 1800. And things started really taking off. And then science started driving technology. While science was not very important at all to those technologies, it was very important to the next range of technologies. The improvement of the internal combustion engine, the creation of internal combustion engines, massive improvements in efficiency in the steam engines as we started learning about thermodynamics. And then, of course, the big magical one of the 19th century, electricity, right? Electricity is beyond really crude stuff. You need some science to understand it. You can't just do it by rules of thumb. Though the early telegraph was kind of built by rules of thumb, but anything beyond that, you really do need science. Faraday and folks like that. And of course, electricity just took off extraordinarily rapidly in the late 19th century. With the light bulb and the AC and DC electrical generator wars and the electrification of cities. And then electric motors, which actually is an underrated innovation, also came around in the 19th century. So those were essentially what Game A was, and what I at least like to call Game A. And we live in that world today. We live in the world that's directly related to that. And the power of Game A is the world that it found in 1700 was a world where most people lived really poor. They lived in huts with dirt floors. Life expectancy is 35, thereabouts, maybe 40. 50% of children died before they were 5. You know, most clothing was made at home, and people had 2 sets of clothes, and they stank most of the time. Life was not good, you know, at least looking back from today in 1700. And those 3 things, you know, modern finance, democratic, at least democratic-ish governance, and science with technology, kind of rolled forward and brought humanity an unbelievable distance in 300 years, a little over. Where now the number of people who are desperately in the poor has just been falling like you can't believe, particularly over the last 30 or 40 years. And of course, us people in the West, I was telling someone this morning that, you know, a welfare mother in the United States today lives a lot better than Louis XIV did, right? You know, if for no other reason than modern dentistry. In fact, I went to the dentist today, so I appreciate modern dentistry. However, this is where Game A, it's done miracles. I mean, it's truly done miracles for the capabilities of the human race, the quality of our lives, the leisures we have. You know, you and I'd be out busting our ass in a field someplace probably, rather than shooting the shit on Skype if it were, you know, 1675, or frankly, even if it was 1775. So we, you know, it's done an amazing transformation for the capacity of the human race. However, because it started from such a tiny little base where humanity was a fairly small pimple on the world. You know, we did not have fossil fuels in 1700, right? The first coal mine in the United States was in 1804. Before that, it was water power. And so humanity was in really no real risk to deplete or reach the limits, the carrying capacity of the Earth. The population of the United States in 1776, 2.5 million people, about the size, a little bit less than the population of Kentucky today, right? So again, let's say in the United States, you know, England was, I don't know, 10 million, something like that, 12 million, 15 million. It was small. So humans were not this massive, dominant thing on the Earth. We weren't tearing the atmosphere apart, you know, et cetera. And we were dirt poor. And so we saw that through the magic of Game A, we could get a lot richer. And then once we solved real medicine, which was remarkably late in the day, about 1870, we did not understand biology at all until 1870. We thought life was magic until Pasteur and some others. And probably medicine was killing more people than it was saving until around 1870, 1880. And of course, the biggest innovations were public health, keeping your sewage out of your water and things of that sort. And so starting around 1870, just this massive population explosion, almost straight up by any historical terms. The population growth started up about 1625, started slowly accelerating through these 17th into the 18th, then it started accelerating the 19th, but late in the 19th, it started going almost straight up. And we now have 8 billion people. And we talked about Ma Nature. I mean, humans not really impinging that much on Ma Nature, say in 1675. Today, humans plus their domestic animals constitute the majority of the large mammal mass on Earth.
Wow.
That's crazy. Here's an even crazier statistic. And then for birds, our domestic poultry are about 80% of the mass of all bird life on Earth. You go, what? That's crazy, right? It was nothing like that when Game A got started. So Game A had no sense of limits, no sense of breaks. It basically was it's this machine that spins, and the Game B analysis is the inter-engine that's driving it today. Is money on money return. Everything is driven around money on money return. You know, that happens at any level of significance: business, politics, even culture today. You know, this goddamn phenomenon of internet influencers. What a corrupt thing that can be. You know, and that's been utterly corrupted by money on money return. So money on money returns driving the machine forward faster and faster and faster, and we're consuming more and more and more. But we are now and most analysts who are really honest will tell you, we are past the long-term carrying capacity of Ma Nature, at least at our current level of civilization. And, you know, of course, as our technology has gotten stronger and stronger and stronger, our capacity to do serious and perhaps existential harm to the human race, you know, has come into existence. Again, you know, even say 1775, 1776. We had gunpowder cannons and sailing ships and, muskets and stuff. All right, you could kill a fair number of people, but it took a lot of work to even kill, 1% of the population. Of course, the most dramatic phase change was the development of nuclear weapons in 1945, and then the hydrogen bomb soon thereafter. If we didn't have quite the capacity to kill off the human race, we certainly quickly developed the capacity to destroy advanced civilization. But then we have a lot of other possibilities, things like CRISPR, the ability to edit genes, and it's not that hard. That's the scary thing about it. James Bond's supervillain is building a weaponized version of Ebola in their basement, right? God knows what that might do. And then, guys like Bill Joy have been talking for a long time about the potential existential risks around nanotechnologies. Now, nanotech has taken longer than he thought, and a lot of other people did. But at some point, the idea of little teeny machines that can literally manipulate the structure of matter, one could imagine that going wrong and turn, as Bill Joy talked about, turning the whole world into gray goo. Not so good, right? And then we have our inadvertent technologies that may be destroying our ability to function. In the Game B world, we talk a lot about the sense-making crisis and the meaning crisis. And I've been involved with building what we now call the internet since 1980, where I went to work for a company called The Source, the very first consumer online information service. We had chat, we had bulletin boards, we met a precursor of social media in 1981. And we thought we were doing work for the good, and that we would have this wonderful world where all the citizens were well informed, democracy would flourish, everything would be wonderful. Well, it didn't quite work out that way. We were not smart enough, truthfully, complexity science would tell us nobody's smart enough to see how this thing would unfold as it scales. And now that we have billions of people chattering it away at each other on these networks, what has seemed to happen is not the heyday of democracy, but rather some form of nervous breakdown of our social ability to actually have a decent information sphere and to make good political decisions.
And I mean, literal nervous breakdown, as in our nervous systems are overwhelmed by the level of content and disruption that's been brought on by our engagement with these systems.
Yeah, absolutely. And our inability as individuals to process these flows at all accurately, right? We were not designed, I try hard to ration my use of online. And in fact, I'm looking forward here in another month to starting my every year 6-month sabbatical from social media. In particular, I am so fucking tired of Twitter. I'll be so glad to not even look at Twitter for 6 months, because it's just the brain is not designed to process that shit. We're not good at it, right? And Game B believes that, particularly in the infosphere, the answer is to not attempt to be good enough yourself, but to use collective forms of sense making. Work with groups of people to try to make sense of the world, and also to use good hygiene around technology. Almost you might call it neo-Mennonitism or neo-Amish, and say, I'm not going to use social media, or at least I'm not going to use the most pernicious forms of social media, or we'll develop our own forms of social media that aren't specifically designed to have some of the world's smartest computers mine our behavior and then pimp us out to advertisers and use that knowledge to keep us online for the longest period of time possible, and to put us in a psychological state to make us amenable to advertising, which is essentially the business model of Facebook and Twitter. So for instance, we are leaving Facebook, and we now have our own Game B site, game-b.org, which is a online community of posts and groups and documents and things of that sort, but it is much cooler in its interface, has no machine learning behind it, does not use your behavior against you. And so we think there are some ways to capture most of the good things about social media, but not in a format that's driven by money on money return, escalate, get the yield up, drive the price of ads up, in this crazy cycle that Facebook is doing. So anyway, that's Game A. It has no brakes. It did miraculous things, but it has overstayed its time. And then, of course, the other one that I personally really focus on, the market economies are really good ideas. And I am no socialist, I can tell you that. On the other hand, I'm not a late stage, highly financialized capitalist guy either. I think both are wrong. And this is, what is so broken about our politics. Team red and team blue politics is basically hyper-capitalists yelling at socialists, right? Both are wrong. We need something new and different that has the self-healing and self-learning and self-driving trajectories of market capitalism, but does not have this no breaks, no sense, no social orientation that our current late-stage capitalism has. And one of the, I think the signs of true brokenness is scale. In 1776, which is one of the most interesting years in history, two big things: Declaration of Independence, but also Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations, the first actual economics book, and one could call it the charter for market capitalism. Though it's not nearly as extreme as some people make it be, but nonetheless. In the United States in 1776, the largest business, at least non-slave business, had 100 employees. It was a shipyard in Philadelphia. You compare the scale of a shipyard with 100 employees building wooden ships by hand to a family farm that might have had 10 people on it, including the farm laborers, et cetera. It's a factor of 10 to 1. And so the power of that shipyard was relatively modest. It was certainly more than a family farm or a corner blacksmith or something, but it was factor of 10. Today we have companies like Amazon and Walmart that employ millions of people, $100 billion plus in revenue, and you compare that to now we typically don't even have our own small businesses. Mostly we're just individual wage slaves working for some company there. And so the asymmetry in power between Mary Random working as an entry level position in some business somewhere and Amazon, it's like totally incommensurable. It's a factor of more than 1 million to 1. In fact, it would be 3 million to 1 approximately in terms of economic power. And that's just a completely different game than what we were playing in 1776. And so game A, again, has no ability to change course. And so we believe that it all has to be rethought and reinvented to actually work for humanity and get humanity back on a track that works within the carrying capacity of the earth, that operates within the cognitive capacity of humans, upgrades the cognitive capacity of humans in multiple ways. One, raising our children more intelligently, educating them more intelligently, operating socially for trying to make sense of the world and to govern ourselves using better mechanisms than first past the post elections, et cetera, and preserve humanity. Because if we don't do something, humanity is going to crash. I mean, we are past the limits, as I say, in many, many dimensions. And so to try to bring us back into a sustainable world, my goal would be to have humanity reach a sane, sustainable, good way of living by the end of this century. And then from there, we'll operate in an intelligent fashion. And then we'll start to slowly open back up again. And my own personal goal is to go explore the universe. Why the hell not, right? Or at least find it. Well, it's kind of a fork. People say, what is your deep meaning? I don't have any deep meaning. It's, famous for saying, when I hear the word metaphysics, I reach for my pistol, right? And so I don't give two fucks about most of that kind of stuff. But I do see that if humanity cannot torch itself over the next 80 years or so, in the long term, say 10,000 years, we can probe the universe, see if there's anybody else out there. And there's, more and more reason to believe maybe there isn't, right? This is a great famous argument. I talk about it in my podcast all the time, the Fermi paradox. I've had experts on the topic and nobody knows. I mean, there's a bunch of arguments that say maybe we're by ourselves, and other ones say maybe there's a whole bunch of them out there, and then there's other analysis that say there's just a few. But if it turns out that we're alone, let's say at least in our galaxy, then the burden on humanity to preserve itself becomes even greater. because I would say we have an opportunity to bring the universe to life. And I would say life is more interesting than non-life. And for humanity to blow its chance to bring the universe to life would be a gigantic sin. And so that's at least my personal, Jim Rutt's, reason for doing this Game B thing, is to preserve our, to morph our civilization into something that is sane, where individuals are sovereign, live beautiful lives, but at low impact on the earth. But we are not hippies looking to live in mud huts and fall back away from advanced technology, but we use technologies for the good of humanity, not in this constant chasing of money on money return. So that was kind of rambling, and I've done a better job of presenting it, but I think that gives people a reasonable idea of what we're up to.